Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Strange things found in woods. I was hunting in northern Texas, and during my second night as I was drinking campfire coffee by the fire, I had that feeling someone was watching. Creeped me out, and I stayed up with a gun in my lap that morning. I investigated and found a couple broken twigs, but nothing conclusive. So make my way up this ridge and stumble upon this thing right here. It had fire with the embers still red and some wired hippie symbol. Tell us your stories, /X/.
I had quit my job and was starting a new one and got 1 week off in between. I used the time to go camping with my dad. We headed to the last part of Oregon we had never been to before, the southeast. Drove to Riley and headed south. Got a couple of jackrabbits near Christmas Valley. We set up camp in the Heart Mountain Antelope Refuge. We were the only ones in the campground. It was still early in the year and the snows had just melted. Still plenty on the ground. The campground has a hot spring with a pool. We were both relaxing in the hot water after dark. It was clear blue skies that night, and I was looking up at the stars. A F-15 or other small jet came roaring across the sky, really loud. As I started following it up in the sky, a large round red light appeared directly in front of the jet's path. The red light was so out of place and surprised me so much that I stood up in the water. As soon as the red light appeared in its path, the jet made a sharp 90-degree turn. It almost looked like the jet sped up to get out of there faster. It was quickly out of view. Once the jet turned, the red light disappeared. By the time my dad started asking what's wrong, it was all over. He never even noticed. I sat back in the water trying to explain to myself what I just saw. I couldn't explain it, so I concocted a story to make myself feel better. It must have been a Top Gun type situation. The jet spotted an enemy fighter, fired a missile and hit the other plane, which burst into a ball of fire. The pilot of the jet probably radioed in "Splash 1, I'm out of here," then turned, hit the afterburners and was gone. Yeah, I know, pretty unlikely. But if that's what happened, it would explain what I saw. I'm okay with that. I slept well that night and didn't think much more about what I had seen until later in our trip. The next day we broke camp and headed for the Alvord Desert on the other side of Steens Mountain. We drove into Lakeview for gas and propane, briefly drove into California, then headed further east. The road takes you into northern Nevada for about 30 miles and back into Oregon. We stopped in Fields, Oregon, population 6, for gas and burgers. I noticed inside a picture of a huge mountain lion. The date showed it had been killed locally in just the past few days. When the lady at the register saw me looking, she quickly offered me a piece of the cat. Turns out her husband had shot the lion just last week. Got my first taste of smoked mountain lion. Fields was an interesting place. From Fields, we headed north into the Alvord Desert. The pavement ended, no phone service, 100 miles from anywhere. The Alvord is a dry salt lake, elevation 4,500 feet. On the west side of it rises Steens Mountain. Between the desert and the mountain, we found another warm spring. We got in our shorts and found someone was already down there. He looked to be about 70 years old and had the darkest tan I've ever seen. It was obvious he spent a lot of time relaxing by that pool in the sun. The old man apparently didn't get to talk to many people because he kept going on and on. Turns out he had been living alone on the edge of the desert for 10 years since his wife passed away. He told us all sorts of stories about the place. When I told him I planned to camp up the mountains somewhere that night, he quickly told me that a lot of strange things happen up there and to stay away. Crazy old man, I thought. Ignoring the old-timer's advice, my dad and I left the gravel road and headed up a dirt 2-track towards the peak of Steens. The road was very rough. We drove carefully for maybe 20 minutes and came to a flat spot that made the most beautiful campsite I have ever seen. From the vantage point, we had the mountain directly behind us and the entire desert was visible, as well as the next mountain range in the distance. It was an unusually warm day for March. and life couldn't get better. We put up our tent and drove further up the dirt road to explore. To our great surprise, we spotted a herd of bighorn sheep and were able to sneak up to within maybe 50 yards for pictures. Back at camp, it soon started to get dark. You could see for miles, and the gravel road we had started on was still within view. It was so quiet that as a car passed down the road, the tires on gravel could easily be heard even from so far away. As dark fell, another car appeared on the gravel road and headed up the mountain on the same 2 tracks we had come on. After a few minutes, the car stopped about halfway between us and the desert and its lights went out. I figured they had probably stopped to camp there just as we had. The stars came out, it was clear, no wind and silent. My dad and I were sitting in folding camp chairs around a small fire we had made. I was still looking down the mountain in the direction of the desert and the other car that came up when another very bright light appeared near the gravel road. I thought it was another car driving down the road and that I was looking at headlights. The lights had that blue color like the HID lights on newer cars. What stuck out was that it wasn't a pair of headlights, it was just one light. The light was so bright that it quickly caught my father's attention as well. At first, I thought it must be a motorcycle as it had just the one headlight, or maybe a car with a burnt-out bulb. The light began to head up the mountain, apparently on the same road we were on, but something was wrong. It had taken us at least 20 minutes to drive up that dirt track as we weren't able to go more than 5 miles an hour. Whatever this was, it was coming fast. My thoughts went back to the red light I had seen in the sky earlier in the trip. No way a car or bike can go that fast on that trail, and there was still no noise. Okay, I thought, this has got to be a helicopter flying up the mountain and they have the spotlight on. But how can it be a helicopter? I thought to myself, when it made no noise. Earlier, I was able to easily hear a car that was miles away. I knew that helicopters were loud. Whatever this was, it was coming fast and silent. It took maybe 10 seconds for the light to make it halfway up the mountain. I would estimate its speed as 100, maybe 150 miles per hour. It was coming directly towards us. My dad broke the silence with, "It saw our fire, and it's coming in right on top of us. Get rid of the fire." As it got closer, we both stood up. I realized that it wasn't any sort of wheeled vehicle because it was now above us, in the air, directly overhead. We both stood still, speechless, looking straight up at this blinding blue light. What had first looked like a headlight now filled the sky above us. Then it disappeared. Like a light switch being turned off, it disappeared. We were both stunned. The rest of that night, we tried to figure out what we had just seen. Inevitably, the topic turned to aliens. My dad has a background in ministry, and I asked him what the Bible says about aliens. He just said that it doesn't, one way or another, make no mention of the subject. There could be or there couldn't be. Before the conversation got too weird, we both decided it was time for bed. It had been clear and calm, but as we got our sleeping bags ready, a wind started to pick up and clouds rolled in, blocking out the stars. We were in a very exposed area at high elevation, and there was nothing bigger than sagebrush to break the wind. Only minutes later, as we got in the tent, it was howling outside. I got in my sleeping bag. The tent was rustling and shaking in the wind, making it even louder. With what I had seen earlier and all the racket from the wind, I thought I wasn't going to get a wink of sleep that night. But somehow, just a couple of minutes later, I was fast asleep. Next, I woke up. I could see an orange light outside the tent and my dad was screaming. I completely freaked out. I had taken off my glasses before falling asleep and could hardly see anything, but I could see an orange glow coming in through the tent wall. It was so loud that I could barely hear, but I made out with my dad yelling, "The fire came on us!" After what I had seen earlier, I didn't know what to think. By the time I found my glasses and got out of bed, my dad had rushed outside the tent, and I could hear him struggling with something. I run to the tent door only to see him slapping one of our folding camp chairs that had fallen in the embers of our campfire and started to burn. I was so mad that he had frightened me so badly over a $5 camp chair. I yelled at him, asking what he was doing. It was just a stupid chair. "Let it burn!" I yelled. When he realized how absurd it was to struggle with the chair, he just kind of dropped and left it. He had actually burned the palm of his hand trying to put the fire out. It was obvious that he was just as creeped out as I was from our experience earlier. We both got back in our sleeping bags without another word. The wind outside was ragging. It was so loud I was sure I wouldn't get another wink of sleep. But somehow, a couple minutes later, I was fast asleep. Next, I woke up something was in my mouth and I was being hit on the back of my head. I was in sheer terror. I was in a mummy bag that I had cinched tight around my neck and head. The bag was on a folding cot. It took me a few seconds to realize that the wind had blown the tent down around me, and the tent roof was over my face and sleeping bag. One of the broken tent poles was blowing in the wind and hitting me right in the back of the head. I got out of the cot and bag and worked my way toward my dad, who was already gathering his clothes under the far corner of the tent. We found the door and got out of the tent. It was like being in a hurricane outside. We both got in the truck. I was shivering from fear and cold. I couldn't hold still. The truck was shaking from the wind pushing against it, and I set the e-brake for fear of the pickup rolling down the hill. It was freezing. I had left my bag and blanket in the tent and wasn't about to go back for it. I just sat in the truck knowing it can't be more than a couple of hours till daybreak and we're out of there. I was just going to wait till morning. Somehow, I can't explain it, I was sound asleep in minutes. I woke up, startled by the silence. It was so quiet. I instinctively opened the door to the pickup and went outside. Without saying a word, my dad followed. Outside, it was calm and silent. All the stars were out, clear skies. I walked over to the tent and watched it together with my dad in amazement. It was standing upright. The last time we had seen it, the wind had it plastered to the ground. We looked at each other but didn't say a thing. We both got inside the tent and back in our sleeping bags. I fell asleep in what felt like seconds. The next I woke up, the sun was shining on my face. Beautiful morning. That was the weirdest night of my life. Everything that happened after I went to bed was just coincidence due to the weather system that rolled through that night, but it sure scared the hell out of me. The tent, upon further inspection that morning, had several broken poles, but once the wind died down, it must have just popped up on its own. The burnt camp chair was still in the fire ring where the wind had blown it over. We packed camp and left in a hurry. I had hopped so much that the other campers we saw drive up the mountain were still there, but they were gone. The light we saw must have passed directly over where they had stopped for the night. Not surprisingly, they packed up and left that morning even faster than we did. That's the story as completely and accurately as I can tell it. The red light I saw the first night, I don't know what it was, but it was far enough away that it didn't bother me too much. That huge light we saw the next night, I have no idea what it was. I don't believe in aliens, and I refuse to consider that. Area 51 is not too far south of there in Nevada. My dad wouldn't talk about that night for at least a year afterwards, he just kind of played it off. Since then, he's told me that he too keeps thinking about it and has no idea what it was or could have been. Nothing I can think of can explain what I saw. One thing I know for sure, that old man who told us not to go up that mountain, that weird things happen up there, he may have been onto something. I went back last year with my wife, parents, and in-laws. We all had a great time, nothing exciting to report. I still think about that night in March of '05 all the time. I still wonder what was up there.
I was hunting elk in the rifle season of 1978 or 79 with my uncle. We were up the middle fork of the Willamette above Oak Ridge. There was about a foot of snow on the ground and we hadn't seen any elk at all. My uncle's work buddy was hunting there too, but camped down the road from us. We were at Indigo Springs. Anyway, the buddy pulls into our camp after dark one night and says he wants us to follow him out in the morning to a spot, because he had something to show us. That was it. No, how was your hunt? No, have you seen anything? Just follow me out tomorrow. So we did. What he wanted to show us was Bigfoot tracks. No joke. The tracks were in the snow, and they walked along the road for about 30 yards where the side of the road was about 4 feet higher than the roadbed. Then the tracks jumped out into the road, I would guess 12 to 15 feet, and then walked across the road. Then the tracks stepped over a log that had snow on it and didn't even brush the snow that was piled up at about, I'd say, 38 or 40 inches high from the ground. I have an 8mm movie of it all that I took when we were there that kind of shows the tracks. Not good equipment, and it was getting sunny by the time we went back to camp and brought the camera back. But anyway, wow, the tracks were just like everybody else who has ever seen them. Describes them as about 16 to 18 inches long and a longer stride than would be humanly possible. The part that amazed me was where it jumped out into the road and then stepped over that log without brushing the snow off. I am a believer, no doubt. I still kind of wonder why we never find bones or a carcass somewhere, but there was no doubting what I saw that day.
I've ran across a few things, but the scariest turned out to be a Vietnam vet's self-made base where he reenacts his memories. Now keep in mind, I was like 20 years old and had no idea what this place was until I looked some stuff up and showed pictures to people later. I was still hunting through an old-growth forest, technically second growth but big trees, on a slightly foggy but calm and quiet day. I noticed an opening in the trees that I had never seen before and headed that way. As I got closer, I noticed a large tarp and empty flagpole in the middle of the circular opening, which was the size of a large baseball infield. Being close to Dallas, I immediately thought cartels and other things I'd heard were still surprisingly active underground, and the hairs on my neck raised big time. I was certain no one was there, but I kept my distance and studied the area with my binoculars. Piles of razor wire with beer cans attached to it surrounded the entire grounds as a fence. There was a large shield-shaped sign that read something like Navajo, 2nd Cavalry Division, with a horse's head and a sword painted on it. Then, all the way around the circle, underground forts were built with roofs and windows to shoot out of, and right when I thought I couldn't be any more freaked, I heard what I thought was yelling, then dogs barking. I took off from the edge of the compound and sprinted into the trees about 50 yards away and froze. My already nervous mind started racing, thinking there were cameras and someone knew I was there and that they were sending the dogs after me. I didn't move a muscle until I saw 2 dogs running through the compound toward me. I flipped the safety off as they were on a dead sprint, but then stopped suddenly, right where I had been standing seconds earlier. I slowly started easing backward as they sniffed around. One was a pit bull, and the other was a similar-sized dog. I thought I was going to have to pop one if they sniffed their way too close, but I was able to back away and take off before they did. I sure watched my trail, though, until I got back. I later went back with 2 others, felt a little safer, and went inside the fence and looked around. Not too much. It was still freaky, but it was crazy how much time went into this place. Still gives me the shivers, but it's a little more comforting knowing it's a war thing and not something more dangerous or illegal.
Around 13, maybe 14 years old, my brother and I have always loved playing in the woods when we were this age. Anyways, about a mile from our home was a creek swamp area. There was this giant old-growth tree growing right along the edge of the swamp, and it was perfect for a tree fort. You know those trees when you see them, the way the branches form, etc. So for a good week off and on, we slowly haul out scrapboards, etc., all the stuff needed to get started building it. We had been all over the tree, up and down it, and had it all planned out. Weekend rolls around, and we decided this would be the day we start. We got out there with some nails and a few hammers and a saw, and right on the tree trunk, at head height, just above all of our boards, etc., for building, was this freaky-ass, demon, devilish-looking face. It was ceramic or something. It was not there the day before, and the thing looks like it had been on it for years, peeling pain, covered in spider webs, moth cocoons, etc. Freaked us out badly. We ran home, told our dad. He came out to look at it. Didn't like it one bit. Thought it was some pagan mask, etc. So he pried it off with the hammer. The nail was old, rusted, etc., as if it had been in the tree for years. He tried to break it with the hammer. All he did was chip it in a few places and break the nose off, so he was fed up and tossed it in the swamp right along the edge of the bank, watching it slowly sink down with bubbles floating up, and it becoming hazier and hazier as it sunk down, sent chills down my spine.
5 years back, my father, a bunch of his friends, and my stepbrother went on a snow run in southwest Washington in about 3 feet of snow and were having a blast. We finally set up camp, and my stepbrother and I, being in our mid-teens, decided we needed to go explore, and so, in our ignorance, headed out in jeans and sweatshirts as the snow was hard enough everywhere, or at least we thought, to be able to walk on top. After chasing a giant raven and seeing a deer wasting 3 or 4 hours, we were totally unaware how far away or in which direction we had walked. The sun started to set, so we figured we would walk back the way we figured we had come and find the road that snowmobile tracks were on and walk down. Needless to say, the road was tougher to find than anticipated. It was getting dark fast, and we started having to walk in snow that was breaking underneath us. In turn, our jeans were wet and we were freezing cold. After walking in the dark for a couple hours, I was sure my dad and co. were on their way along the roads to look for us. Unfortunately, we had walked in the opposite direction of their immediate search area. Anyways, back to us. We were shivering, and my stepbrother, being a few years younger than me, was a tad more shaken than I. He kept asking me, "Are we going in the right direction? Are we close?" Of course, I had no idea, and the only flashlight-like instrument was a blue light keychain light that made my eyes hurt more than anything. I figured we were in pretty bad shape when my feet no longer hurt and were completely numb, and I had stopped shivering. Bad sign, last time I checked. I started praying really hard. We walked through another gully and decided that if we could find a rock big enough or a stump to get us off the snow, we would stop, huddle together, and try to make as much noise as possible to alert anyone to our location. And bingo, big rocks everywhere. So we climbed onto one about 4 feet off the snow and tried to make noise for a short while, and I noticed my brother is sleeping. Exhausted as well, I start to really worry, and I'm far too tired to make any noise. And then the strange stuff starts. As we sit motionless on this rock, I heard some movement in the tree line above us. I think elk right off the bat. Now, I've been close to a lot of elk, but as some of you know, last year was my first bow hunting season, so I may be a little green in this regard, but the smell coming off these was, in a word, horrible. They stay still, as do I, with a mix of fear and exhaustion. Then came 3 to 5 of these creatures, and within 1 to 2 minutes, they had cleared 200 yards of difficult terrain and were now standing around us, within 7 feet of us. Thanks to the moonlight, I could see hot breath spouting out of them. I cannot stress how intent whatever they were was on figuring out what we were doing there. It felt like they were all locked on my eyes in a bizarre, silent interrogation. I was absolutely terrified, but at the same time calm enough to realize I didn't think they wanted to consume or attack us, so I relaxed. These things stood around us, breathing heavily for a few more minutes, just pacing around our spot. I swear at this time the whole forest was alive, not for the fact that I was in a bit of a mental stupor. Anyway, one of these things started making some weird noises, and there was like a hissing voice coming out of the one farthest to my left. The others stopped moving, and they all bolted, gone across the area opposite the way they came. Probably 20 minutes later, we heard a truck horn blasting, and it was the cavalry. They must have heard the vehicle approaching and figured it was time to end our date. Anyway, to get to where the horns and yelling were coming from, we had to walk up the way these things came down, and it took me and my half-dead brother almost 30 minutes to get to the top, right onto the road. We were so close to the road. Anyway, we finally got picked up, taken to the doctor, and released after some TLC. My stepbrother and I rarely talk about this, perhaps from the embarrassment of getting lost, or because I don't think he was alert enough to recall very much of it. Elk, bear, or something else that night has had a profound impact on my life, and I now have a much greater respect for nature than before.
So I went to Ithaca College, and people who know the area know that there are a lot of woods around the college. I've explored these woods a few times, but the funniest thing you generally find are party campsites set up by students. There's one not too far away from a service road that runs up through the woods, with old rusted cars and trucks from the 1930s or some shit. It's kind of a bizarre place, and there's been weird shit I've found there in the past. Everything from old umbrellas to a burnt-up lawn chair, and there's weird spiky metal things up in the trees. I've always had the sense that there are probably some very weird rituals that have taken place there when it's in use. I found another campsite, this one further up the hill. It was winter, so I had the advantage of being able to just follow the footprints of students that had trekked out there through the snow. There was a makeshift shelter set up by leaning branches against a tree and covering them with a tarp. It was pretty impressive, actually. Under the tarp, there were a couple of pitchers and the top half of a few 2-liter soda bottles. From a quick look around, it was obvious that the place was being used as a hideout. As I was walking back to campus, I passed a couple of guys walking in the opposite direction. As I got closer to them, one guy hid a pipe or something inside his jacket. I just smiled at them as we passed. My family used to have a big dog we'd take for walks in the woods. One time he actually found a whole deer leg just lying there. No idea how it got there. Dead deer, I guess.
I know you were a kid, but were they really hairy and short or tall? Everyone knows about Bigfoot. No one ever talks about what we in Australia know as the little fellas. Remember that hobbit fossil they found somewhere in Southeast Asia or somewhere? I think they are pretty much them. I'm not supposed to talk about this because it's a tribal secret. I'm 1/32nd Aboriginal. I doubt anyone will find out on 4chan though. An uncle and second cousin or something look after sacred sites out in the bushland near a mountain range back in my hometown on the south coast of New South Wales. I used to get to go with them on bushwalks sometimes as a kid. They would show me bush tucker that I could snack on, berries and herbs, plants you could chew up and rub on a cut to take away the pain, and stuff like that I've mostly forgotten. Anyway, they took me to pretty much the biggest out-of-bounds area on the whole mountain. No white people have ever been there. I'm pretty white myself though, LOL, but I guess being blood-related to important members of the tribe helps. In fact, if a white man wanders into these grounds, they have to be punished, even if that means committing murder. But they'll probably have more immediate fears if they ever go there. They took me to this small cave entrance on the side of the mountain. There were some markings and handprints at the entrance. Some were really small, like narrow children's handprints, but with really long fingers and nails like they were wearing acrylic fake ones. Inside the cave was this huge Aboriginal painting of a whale, like 30 feet long on this curved wall. Pretty awesome.
Oh my fucking god, the smugness is radioactive, so fuck you.
Anyway, I looked further into the cave, but my uncle warned me to not wander into there yet and to stay close. He shouted out some kind of animal call like Wooii-Wooii-Wooii, and I heard a similar call return from deeper into the cave. Then I saw these eyes coming towards us, like a dog's eyes when you see them at night. This little hairy man carrying a small wooden club came forward into the light. I was kind of in shock and don't know how quickly this happened, but it seemed like forever before my uncle said something in the language of the tribe. The thing talked back to him and gestured to me. It seemed rather intelligent. There were small bits of wood or bone tied to the ends of some of its hair around its face. It looked rather human underneath the fur and had white skin, but probably about 4 feet tall. I remember its eyes had large pupils but seemed rather human. My uncle told me these little fellas used to live side by side with Aboriginals before Europeans came to Australia, and that there used to be a lot more of them. They live in that cave and eat plant roots, berries and leaves from the surrounding area. There is only this one small tribe living there, and he isn't sure if there are any more, and that will probably die out sooner or later. Keeping them secret is the only way to make sure they don't die out.
You should convince them that is the only sure way to make sure they do die out. Much like endangered species, I am sure people would go to great lengths to make sure these people don't die out. Though, you know, they might not like it so much because zoos and experiments and shit.
My dad and I were hunting on Weyerhaeuser property, and we're way back on this section, when we came around this corner to see a van parked right in the middle of the road. Out came two guys with long hair out of this van with a lot of smoke trailing behind them, waving at us to stop. My dad did, and they said they were broken down. We didn't have anything to jump-start them, though. There was a couple of women in the back with their small kids. We gave one guy a ride back to town in the back of the truck. We kind of figured they broke down on their way to harvest some of their crop. About 10 years ago on Highway 26, I was driving down this old road nobody had driven down for a while. The road straightened out, and 100 yards down the road, there was an RV with trash around it. It was kind of a gloomy, wet, dark day, and I got this weird feeling someone was watching. I hightailed it out of there. A couple of years later, I drove by that road and saw an abandoned vehicle pushed off the side of the road. Same kind of deal hunting in the Tiago unit, and drove down an old road that off the side someone built a wood cabin, and they were there, and they had guns. They didn't look like the friendly kind either. My buddy hit reverse and we got out of there. I have also seen some of the usual rubbers, dirty magazines, burnt-out cars, old steam donkeys, plaques to dead hunters.
One late evening in southern West Virginia, my brother and I were walking out of the woods. We had been pheasant hunting and were in a hurry to get out of the woods before dark. If you have ever been in the woods at night in southern West Virginia, you will completely understand. About a half-mile from the truck, we came upon a man sitting on a log and just rocking back and forth with his arms folded on his chest, as if he were cold. Being the friendly sort, we asked him if he was okay, to which he replied that he was just fine. We talked to him for another 10 minutes or so, and then he started acting really strange. He started acting like he was scared to death, and started saying things like, "You boys had better get going before it gets dark. Bad things happen in the woods at dark." Something told me this was a bad situation, as my sixth sense had been honed during my service in Iraq. I again asked him if he was okay, and did he need anything. Again, he said no, so we went on our way. 2 days later, I read in the newspaper where they had found a man beaten and mutilated in the exact same spot we were hunting at. I immediately notified my uncle, a tough state trooper, and told him the story. It was in fact the same guy, and the coroner estimated his time of death about 1 hour after we saw him. So we gave an official statement, and they inspected our shotguns and knives just to make sure it wasn't us, I suppose, and told us to keep shut about it because this murder was just the tip of a very big iceberg. To this day, I wonder if we should have doubled back and hid in the bushes. Being no stranger to combat, I might have saved the poor chap. They have never found the killers, but I am convinced that by the way he was acting, he knew what was about to happen.
7 or so years ago, me and my buddies were hunting in the Wallowas. One evening we were driving to a spot and came around a corner. There was a guy parked in the middle of the road and peeing. He was watching this tree covered in with that dry, stringy moss burn. We were thinking like, wow, what the hell? The guy never paid us no mind, till the burning died. It was quite a sight. Then hopped in his rig and got over so we could get by. We got where we wanted to go and discovered the guy had burned a few trees here too. Upon looking a little closer, he peed around every tree. That was just plain creepy. The next day we had a game warden in our camp, so we told him about this guy. The game warden kinda chuckled and said, "You sure he was peeing?" We told him we were a little concerned about this guy doing it during the summer and burning the whole mountain, so he would check things out. The next morning we had a forest guy up there asking us a bunch of questions. He said he had a report of this a couple of years ago but didn't get up here right away, and the snow got too deep. So he wanted to act on this quickly, because there were also some unsolved arsons in Elgin. So one of our guys took him around, and they found 30 to 50 trees burnt. A few of them were live trees, so that's what he said they could nail him on. Last we saw was a bunch of green trucks racing up to get him, but we never heard what happened.
Man, the only thing that creeps me out more than paranormal stuff is the woods. Whenever you find weird shit like this, you just get a strong, eerie feeling like you need to get out of there. My family has a small plot of woodland, 20 acres, a little bit out of Rochester, Minnesota. There's always creepy shit going on there. I'll list them in Greentext. Twisted deer legs as if they had been pulled right off and snapped in half. Hear rocks pounding each other, loud thumps against trees, that feel of constantly being watched, neck hairs standing up. Hear high-pitched screams. See large footprints in the dirt on the edge of a cornfield. Not too sure what it could be. Maybe not a Sasquatch, but it's freaky as shit.
You ever see branches that look like they are pulled out right out of the tree with great strength? That is definite Sasquatch stuff. Also weird, disgusting smells. Ever smelled those? For some reason, they smell very bad.
Somewhat, we've seen large branches snapped and twisted, and smaller twigs similar to that Blair Witch shit. As far as any smells go, yeah. We have a camping spot up on a hill about 75 yards from a ravine, and there have been a few instances where we've smelled a strong, musky smell. At first, I thought it was a skunk, but the smell seemed different. The weird thing, though, is that we were actually able to communicate with the thing once. I was 12 at the time, and we were hearing those loud thumps against a tree that seemed about a quarter mile away, maybe not even. Well, I thought, what the hell, and pounded the tree with a fallen small branch a couple of times. Sure enough, 5 seconds after I stopped, I heard again a thump in the distance. As far as the screams, though, let me clarify. It was as if there were two of them communicating to each other on opposite ends of the woods. We would hear a screech and some thumps, and a few seconds after, we would hear a reply of sorts on the other end of the woods. Might have been a couple of the farmers in the area fucking with us, but I highly doubt that was the case, and none of the neighbors knew we were there that weekend.
I remember I went out to a lake shore with my family on vacation when I was 15, and it was terribly boring, so I went on a walk across the shore. So I keep walking. There's a sunset across the lake, which looks really cool. It gets dark, but I'm like literally 10 minutes away from my home. So I think I'll go forward a little and then go home. What I saw has fucking terrified me. Basically, I think there's something about 2 meters from me, so I take my phone and turn on the flashlight in it. And I shit you not, a skull, a fucking human skull on wooden pole. Then I look down and I find half-rotten goat's head, cow's skull, and a shitload of bones and an old rusty knife in the ground. Needless to say, I ran like hell from there. I actually jumped into the water and nearly swam back, hoping whatever did it can't swim. As I got back home soaked, I told my parents what happened, and obviously no one believed me, and they just played it off, thinking I was bored and went for a swim. And let's end the night with a quote.
The most terrifying force of death comes from the hands of men who wanted to be left alone. They try so very hard to mind their own business and provide for themselves and those they love. They resist every impulse to fight back, knowing the forced and permanent change of life that will come from it. They know that the moment they fight back, their lives as they have lived them are over. The moment the men who wanted to be left alone are forced to fight back, it is a form of suicide. They are literally killing off who they used to be, which is why, when forced to take up violence, these men who wanted to be left alone fight with unholy vengeance against those who murdered their former lives. They fight with raw hate and a drive that cannot be fathomed by those who are merely play-acting at politics and terror. True terror will arrive at these people's door, and they will cry, scream, and beg for mercy. But it will fall upon the deaf ears of the men who just wanted to be left alone. Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.